All right, so we are in Unit 1, but we are in Chapter 3 looking at some practice problems, just so we can see some. And we were looking at graphs, how to set up graphs. We were looking at some frequency tables here as well, just to give us some more examples. Again, if I'm moving too fast through these examples, you need to pause the video so that later on down the road you can write them down and come back through and answer. This is saying that in Chance magazine articles described in the prior example, the impact of applicants' ethnicity on the likelihood of admission to a Houston Independent School District magnet school. So here's what we have, right? So if you take a look at this, we have right here their ethnicity, and we have whether they were accepted, not accepted, turned away, and their totals, right, in the margins right here on the side, right? What percent of all applicants were Asian? Well, all applicants. So there's all applicants. How many were Asian? Right there, I can see. What percent of the students accepted? So, were Asian. What percent of the students accepted were Asian? Well, there's accepted Asian students. So, trying to figure out now, and that's the question, how do I know the difference between, like, do I take it out of just this or this? Well, because it says what percent of the students. Well, it doesn't say what type of students, so I'm assuming that, and what percent of Asians were accepted. Just Asians were accepted. And then what percent of all students were accepted? All students accepted. All right, so we can figure that stuff out there as well. So anyway, there are 175 qualified applicants, right, to the Houston Independent School District. Of those, 292 were accepted that were Asian, so that's why we divide them, because again, it wants to know what percent of all applicants were Asian. Then we want to know what percent of the students accepted were Asian. What percent of the students accepted were Asian? Well, there were 931 accepted students. Of those, 110 were Asian, so 110 divided by that. What percent of accepted students? So they narrowed it down by saying what percent of the students accepted were Asian. Accepted were Asian, not what percent of the total students were Asian. That's what this one said. That's why when it said all applicants, that's all of them. What percent of accepted? Now it says what percent of Asian students, right, were accepted. So now we're looking at it that way. What percent of Asian students were accepted? So now what percent? There are that many Asian students, 110 were there accepted for 37.7%. And then what percent of all students were accepted? What percent of all students were accepted? Right there is where we're looking for all of it. So there's a total of that. 931 were accepted for 53%. Just going over how to read these two-way tables is basically what we're saying here. Examine the table about ethnicity again, right? And it says, does it appear that the admissions decisions are made independent of the applicant's ethnicity? So does it look like decisions are made based on ethnicity or not, looking at this table, right? Well, it appears as though you can go by specific totals to see of each type that there is that is accepted versus not accepted. So, point is, there are 1,755 qualified applicants, right, total. 53% were accepted total, we said, right? So 53 were accepted total. 17% were waitlisted when you divide those. 30% were turned away. Now, while the overall acceptance rate was 53%, right, out of those 53%, so out of those, 93.8% of them, of all blacks and or Hispanics were accepted. Point is, right here, looking across, out of black or Hispanic, 485 divided by 517, 93-ish to almost 94% were accepted, compared to the Asian population of acceptance, which is only 37, and the white population, which was 35.5. So it's appearing right now like this college, even though it accepts half the people, it appears as though in that 53% that were accepted, that almost 94% of all African American and or Hispanics were accepted. Overall, 29.5% of the applicants were black or Hispanic. So overall, right, black or Hispanic, divide those, it says around 29.5%, but only 6% of those turned away, or black or Hispanic. So turned away, if I take 32 divided by the 524, that's where they're getting that 6%. So Asians accounted for 16.6% of the applicants. So out of all total applicants, divide those to get 16.6%, but 25.3% of those were turned away. So how many were turned away out of the Asian applicants? Divide those in order to figure out what that is. And it appears that the admissions decisions were not independent of the applicant's ethnicity. To me, it's looking kind of shady that it seems more likely that someone is turned away or accepted based on a certain ethnicity if I was to do that. All right, but they were not independent of the applicant's ethnicity. A survey of autos parked in student and staff lots at a large university classified the brands by country of origin, as seen on TV. So we have the driver is a staff or a student, and we have the make or model, right, of the car. So what percent of all cars surveyed were foreign cars? All right. Well, what percent of all cars? Well, that means I need to add all those puppies up to figure out the total, and then I need to figure out the total of the cars that were foreign. Well, both of those were foreign. So I'm going to define my frequency tables first. But in order to get this, first we need the totals. All right. So here are the totals with the rows and the columns. So now that I have those, I'm set. Okay, because that makes the problem easier. Because now it says non-American cars. Well, that is European and that is Asian, so I can take those and add them up, and I can divide it to figure out that it looks like almost 41% of them are foreign vehicles that are in that parking lot, right? And I guess there's only a part A to that one, or did I just move on? I guess what percent of American cars were owned by students? I guess I did just move on, but either way, the point is, if I wanted to know the percent of American cars, what percent of the American cars were owned by students, what percent of American cars were owned by students, I would take the 107 divided by that. What percent of the American cars were owned by students, divide those two numbers to get your answer. 107 divided by 217, and 212, and you get roughly 50.47%. I don't know why that's not there. See, what percent of the students owned American cars? So students that owned American cars, right? So students that owned American cars would be 107 divided by 195, which is roughly 54.87% if you take those two and divide them. What is the marginal distribution of origin? They want to know what the marginal distribution is of each of them, so you could divide each of those to figure out what is going on of each of them. All right. And if you want it of origin, those are the totals. So I just want you to figure out what each of those are. What are the conditional distributions of origin for driver classification? Driver classification would be this divided by this and this divided by this. So 195 divided by 359. 195 divided by 359, roughly 54.32. When you divide those, and right here 164 divided by 359 is roughly 45.68% of those. And do you think that the origin of the cars is independent of the type of driver? Well, if we find of each one of these the marginal, basically what they're saying is, do you think like a certain type of driver drives a certain type of car? And scanning the data roughly, right, out of these, student drivers appear to have more American cars, but to be honest with you, the staff have the same as well. Okay, and American cars in general are split evenly amongst them, and they seem to be split evenly amongst them. The European cars, surprisingly enough, is the only one where there seems to be a little ambiguity to it, I guess, if we were to say that. And by that I mean it looks like more student drivers have European vehicles than staff as a whole. But 33 divided by 195, around 17% of drivers that are students have European cars, whereas 12 divided by 164, 7%. So there does seem to be a pretty bigger discrepancy there. It seems like a little bit more European cars for students is basically what's happening. When I come back here, I will take a look at this one as well. We'll see where we're at with this problem.